This is a Saab 9.3. Specifically, this is my Saab 9.3. I've owned this car now for just over 2.5 months, and by the time you see this video, it will, if I'm lucky, have been sold. What happened? Even by my own standards, this is not a very long time to have owned a car. Well, to give you a potted history, I sold my Lotus Evora last year, got some money back from that. I bought myself a BMW M3 as a track car, and I took in part exchange against the Evora a lovely 996 generation 911 C4S. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the finances to run a classic 911 as a daily, if you can call a 996 a classic 911, but anyway, I don't have the finances to do that. So that car was sold, and I then was looking at getting something to fill the void. I couldn't drive a 625 horsepower supercharged M3 every day, certainly not through winter, so I bought a BMW 130. A great little car. And then I decided to sell that because I wanted to buy one of my dream cars, which is a Toyota Celica GT4. And I couldn't really afford to have the 130 as a daily because for all of its many great attributes, it was also a little bit too thirsty for sensible daily duties considering the mileage that I do. So I went on the look for a sensible daily, and this is what I got, because in theory this was exactly the right car for me to have bought. You see, this has a 1.9 litre twin turbo diesel engine that gives you a good blend of performance and economy. In this particular car, the performance is nearly 250 horsepower and the fuel economy is over 40 miles to the gallon, which I deem enough in a daily car. It means that I can get over 500 miles to a tank when driving modestly, and that's good enough for me. I've not got aspirations of 60 miles to the gallon or anything like that. That's fine. The BMW was averaging about 30 something to the gallon. This averages about 43. It's a big improvement. So every time I do a big long journey, I'm saving a good amount of money. The reality is that this YouTube channel is doing very well for me at the minute, and things have come on a long way in the last few months, but I'm just that little bit shy of actually earning decent enough money out of YouTube to run a nice high-end thirsty car as my daily driver. But baby steps. Anyway, onto this car. I started looking for just, well, basically a nice comfy big diesel car. Not a big fan of diesels, and indeed owning a diesel is going to be increasingly difficult in the UK over the next few years, but for the journeys that I do and the places that I go, it does still make an awful lot of sense. I did consider buying a small little city car. I even thought about buying something like a little Renault Sport Clio or something like that, until I found out that they do absolutely atrocious fuel economy, and they also sit at like 4,000 RPM on the motorway, and that would just drive me insane. Small cars are wonderful and great and fun when you want to thrash them down a little back road like this, but if you want something to cruise in, they're pretty bad. Now, the last sensible daily that I had before the BMW was my Alfa Romeo 147, and I really did like that car, so I started thinking, what can I get to be a bit similar? Now, I love the Alfa 156, but the consensus seemed to be that they're all of a certain age now, and so very likely to throw up potentially ruinous bills. I really liked the little 1.9 engine that my Alfa had, so I thought, what else had that engine? And I soon turned up the Saab 9.3. And my friend Laurie has a Saab. I don't know whether he's actually ever spoken about it on his channel for various reasons, but it cost us the princely sum of about £300, and he did about 2,500 miles driving around Europe in it. And it was a wonderful, comfy, and relatively economical thing, and did exactly what you would want a big car to do. So I started looking at 9.5s and then 9.3s, because I decided actually the 9.3 is plenty big enough for my needs. It's a slightly newer, it's going to be slightly sportier. all that jazz. I knew that the 1.9 would be the version I want. I then found out that they do a 1.9 TTID, which is what this is. This is the twin turbo diesel. Those are officially about 180 horsepower rather than the 150 of the single turbo cars. I think they did a lowered power version as well. I was originally looking at examples that were a little bit tired and haggard and about £1,000 worth, but nearly all of them had symptoms that sounded a lot like failing turbos or failing engines or failing clutches or all of the above. So I started looking at slightly more expensive examples, and then I saw this up for sale. It was quite a bit more money, but it just looked absolutely awesome. Something about it just seemed right. And the specification was quite something too. This car's been enthusiast owned, and it's got a whole host of nice bits thrown at it. So you've got that Nordic tuning stage 2 remap, bringing the power up to around 240, 250 horsepower. You've got just shy of 500 newton meters of torque. You've got a strut brace at the front. You've got these beautiful 18-inch Ronal alloys, which are finished in chrome silver. Not my preferred colour for the alloys, but it works well enough. Now, the paintwork is very much a Scandinavian gangster black, and it's pretty imperfect in a lot of places, but the car has a great stance thanks to the Bilstein B8 dampers and the IBAC springs that it's running. Those do make it look just pretty cool. And because this is a very late car, this is a 2011, which is pretty much the last of this generation of 9.3, and the one that came after wasn't really that well developed. You've got what they call the Griffin front end, so it looks totally different to the cars that went before, and it's just that bit cooler. This car's also got the rear end from the Turbo X, and it's got little side bits from the Turbo X. It's got the brakes from the Turbo X as well, so there's a lot good about it. And in my head, what this was basically a car that looked aggressive and sporty and cool and commanding, but actually was a nice, soft, comfy cruiser of a car. And certainly when you get in it, that's the first impression that you have. These seats are wonderfully comfortable. This car started off as an SE, which is the lower end trim, but it's actually got basically all the bits on that you would expect from an Aero, and it has all the usual Saab refinements, you know, the silly cup holder down here, the display that you can hit a button and it turns off everything except the speedo, all that sort of stuff, all this stuff, you know, the key goes in down here. And this car also has a pretty much straight through exhaust system, so there's no DPF, the EGR's been deleted, all the standard diesel stuff, and it sounds like the bloody Batmobile. Which is not to my taste, if I'm being perfectly honest, but from in here, it's not that intrusive. Despite the sporty suspension, it's actually reasonably comfy. It's not super plush, but it's certainly far from uncomfortable, and I'm on pretty bad roads at the moment. The handling's a weird one too, because when you're moving around town and at slower speeds, it's quite a slow rack. However, these cars are fitted with a passive rear steering system that Saab called Reaxis. I'm sure plenty of people will always be keen to point out the fact that somewhere buried under here is essentially the ingredients that make a Vauxhall Vectra. However, the truth is that Saab changed so much about this car that you couldn't actually build one on the same production line as the Vectra. And I kind of like that. I think that's really cool. I appreciate all the little differences between this and a Vectra, all those little details that just make it stand out as something just a little bit different, just a little bit extra. And this car, being a late one as well, does benefit from a lot of just small refinements, such as the fact that this whole dash down here is laid out in a much simpler and easier way to use than the million button setup that the earlier cars had. And generally this does feel like a pretty refined and pretty well put together car. Squeaks and rattles are fairly minimal. There's a little bit of plastic at the back that seems to crackle a little bit when it heats and cools, but once you've been driving for about 10 minutes, it quietens itself down. Now, the one bit of the spec that I really wasn't that enthused about when I saw the car on eBay was the fact that it has an auto gearbox in it. I am very much a manual fan, but a couple of things did help me convince myself that an auto wouldn't be too bad in this particular car. Number one, it's a relatively modern, for the time, 6-speed automatic, replacing the earlier 5-speed, and it can lock up fairly quickly, which means that you're not going to have the same power losses that you would have in an old school torque converter auto, and it shifts fairly smoothly. And I thought, you know what? For boring daily duties and things, I'm not going to want the ultimate driving machine, which is not what this car was going to be anyway. Sod it, I may as well get an auto, you know, and just bimble around in it. Unfortunately, the auto gearbox was a source of some trouble when I first got the car, because it just wasn't shifting right. It was kind of almost misshifting and clunking through some gears. I was quite worried as to what was actually wrong with the car. None of this appeared on the test drive, but as I started to get to know the car and drove it harder, I noticed these problems. Fortunately, I paid a visit to Bell & Colville in Surrey, who are a Saab main dealer, and I say are rather than were, because they assure me that Saab do still exist as a company. They just don't really have any cars to sell, certainly not in this country anyway. And so I got them to give the car a thorough going over. We changed the gearbox oil, and lo and behold, it actually shifts nicely and smoothly. You've even got little buttons mounted on the steering column here, which I think Saab called Steptronic, something like that. All these things were something tronic, weren't they? Let's face it. And actually, it's pretty good to do that with. It's never going to be a nice rapid-fire, responsive dual clutch or even ZF 8-speed style of box. It just was never going to happen, was it? But it's decent enough for the time period. Unfortunately, when you leave it to its own devices, it's never really that brilliant. It wants to shift too early, and because you've got those turbos, and it's not super laggy for a diesel, it's actually pretty good, but you've got the auto box being a bit slow and dim-witted, and the turbos being a little bit slow to spool up, and then just the whole thing kind of, if you want to actually make progress, it can be a little bit frustrating. Eventually you can get it into a bit of a stride, and you can actually stick the car into a sports mode, and you can even have a manual sporty mode where it will change gear a bit faster, and you can do that. Now, when you get on the move, that rear axle steering system means that the car is actually quite agile, and you can really throw it around much more than you think you should be able to. It's actually quite impressive how well it can go around some corners. Probably helped by the fact that this does have a Pirelli's all-round. That's a good thing from the previous owner, and the brakes certainly do work, but it's got plenty of torque for sure. It pulls along quite nicely, and surprisingly for a diesel engine, it actually likes revving out. Granted, it only goes to about 4,500 RPM, but it's happy to be taken there. Hello?
Hello. Are you out my way still, or you go back home?
I'm literally in the middle of a review. Why is that?
That's right, no, I just didn't know if you want to swing in.
No, I've got to head home. I get shitloads of editing to do, mate. Sorry.
No, that's right, that's okay. No, don't worry.
Alright, catch you later.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Bye.
So you can throw the car around a corner with quite some verve, but really not that happy doing it, and I think that's really the source of my mistake. It's not super comfy and wafty and luxurious, neither is it super agile, fun and brilliant in the twisties. It's a kind of awkward halfway house. If it was your only car, you would say that it's a great compromise, but it's not my only car. I have a nice, agile, great in the twisties car already. What I should have gone for was a nice, larger engined car with a manual box that was maybe a bit softer and a bit waftier, and just gone with it and just stomached the higher fuel bill, but I couldn't. It's an odd one. This car, it makes me feel something that I've very rarely felt. In these reviews, I generally either come away loving a car or hating a car or being kind of disappointed. This car, I'm just indifferent to. I just had a friend helping me drive it, Darren, who's a really big petrol head, and he was helping me do the drive-by things, and he really liked this. He was commenting on how nice a car it is to steer, and I agree, it is. It's lovely, but it just doesn't excite me. I mean, it looks awesome. I mean, it does look really super badass. Like, I love that about it, and that's probably why I bought it. I'm awful for impulse buying. It's a mean looking thing. It really is. And it's full of cool things that are no doubt going to be of great interest to some sort of Saab fanatic, but I'm not a Saab fanatic. And that's why by the time you will have seen this video, I mean at the time of recording, this car is already on eBay in the middle of an auction. It's going to be gone. I think somebody needs to have it that's going to really love it. And that's just not me. So, it's a cool car for sure. Everyone that looks at it really likes it, but it does just leave me cold. So there you have it. My Saab 9.3 review. It's going to be sold and I need to get something else and I really don't know what I'm going to get. Part of me wants to go and get a fun little convertible, an MX-5 or something like that, because summer is coming and so I want to enjoy it. But then of course people are going to be asking loads of money for little convertibles. There's a 3rd gen MX-5 over there for £8,000. I certainly don't have that kind of budget, and I need to spend some money on doing up the Toyota and various other things. So there we have it, my Saab 9.3 review. Thanks for watching, everyone. Sorry it's a bit of a downer. I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.